Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I see lots of Helvetas colleagues joining. Welcome, welcome.
Breath.
We're gonna start soon and let people join as they manage. We will repeat this a little bit later, but as you all know, this webinar is gonna be recorded. So I hope it's fine for all of you. Welcome to the new arrivals. Nice to see some old acquaintances. All right. So while we wait, I wanted to extend my gratitude for everyone joining. And everyone is very busy, and October is one of those months where things are kicking up. So we will keep to the hour, and I hope we have a lively discussion. I will also say this again, but please, in the meantime, if you already have contributions or questions on this topic, we really want to hear from you. It's not one of those webinars where we're going to talk the whole time and have very little time for questions. This is supposed to be a webinar where we get to get your insights as well as practitioners in different countries and regions. So we hope that you get to contribute as much as you want. And if not, there's always other fora that RECONOMY puts at people's disposal to exchange. So I think we're just going to start to make sure that we have time to cover everything. Welcome. Today's topic is a very hot topic. We're going to be talking about how we can ensure that we leave no one behind as we progress towards the green transition. This is a discussion that is hosted by the RECONOMY program. We will talk a little bit more about RECONOMY in a second. So I'm just gonna go through the agenda for today. We have obviously the very warm welcome that we're extended to all of you, which will be followed by an overview of the RECONOMY program, which will be a video. Then we will talk a little bit about some concepts that are important for everyone to be on the same page about regarding today's topic. And that will be followed by a discussion with our three panelists, whom I will introduce in a short bit. And we will have at least half an hour for questions and answers, or comments or additions. As I said, for those of you who are here from the beginning, sorry if I repeat myself, we really want to hear from you and to get your tips and tactics related to how to ensure that we are both green and fair as we transition towards more environmentally sustainable economic and social models. So this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be published on the RECONOMY website so that everyone knows. Now, we will start with a very short introduction to RECONOMY that I'm going to very ungracefully try to do it like this. There we go. So this is a 3.5 minute video that will just give you everything you need to know about RECONOMY.
Partnered with the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency to facilitate an inclusive and green economic development program in the Eastern Partnership and the Western Balkan regions. The name of the program, RECONOMY, stands for Starting Afresh, revitalizing the transitioning economies in the two regions. The 12 countries in the two regions include Albania, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Georgia, Kosovo, Moldova, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Serbia, and Ukraine. The main goal of RECONOMY is to enable women and youth, including the most disadvantaged and excluded, to benefit from economic opportunities by increasing their income and taking up decent and green jobs, inclusively and sustainably. To achieve the main goal, RECONOMY works along 3 work streams: services, competencies, and influences. What do these 3 work streams mean for better income and decent and green jobs for women and youth? When businesses embrace the new or better services facilitated by RECONOMY, it is expected that their investment and growth would increase as a result, making the private sector more competitive. These changes on the demand side, however, are insufficient. Competence of the labor force are required, as is the ability to join companies or launch one's own economic endeavors. These come from inclusive, affordable, and demand-driven skills and intermediation services and support systems, leading to the employability and mobility of women and youth. Further, businesses benefit from an enabling environment that is tailored to their industry or company, as it influences their productivity and spurs them to do business in a better way. RECONOMY places a high priority on the double dividend, or the addition of economic and environmental values. The program's goal is to accelerate the just and inclusive green transition of the local economies. RECONOMY believes that there are no simple solutions in complex and dynamic contexts, such as the Eastern Partnership and the Western Balkan regions. The program continues to create methods that are adaptable, as well as identify and handle obstacles and possibilities. Based on strong data and risk-informed context and risk assessments, the program aims to establish a coherent response and shared vision for complex and dynamic contexts. Additionally, the core of RECONOMY is using current knowledge and practices and encouraging learning and sharing between countries. The program accomplishes this by involving a variety of stakeholders, including public institutions, nonprofits, academia, and businesses. While doing so, the program focuses on common issues that countries of both regions face, as well as shared actors that may step up and support systemic improvements. Since RECONOMY acknowledges that people live in countries, not regions, the program looks at local regional processes and relationships. Without a place-sensitive frame of view, development efforts that ignore these facts frequently fall short. RECONOMY relies on implementing partnerships to bring about large-scale and sustainable change. Therefore, partnerships are important to our implementing model. The program also implements activities through the Program Facilitation Unit, which is responsible for steering the whole program. Together, we revitalize, reconnect, and reshape the transitioning economies in the Eastern Partnership and the Western Balkan regions.
There you go.
Hey,
So that's
if you're a
what
yoga practitioner,
RECONOMY
you
is.
definitely know
And that's
people who
my
like
cue
to
to
show
back
up.
them up. There we go. Okay. So back to the presentation. Here we are. All right. So here we just wanted to start with a very quick overview of what we mean by a green and fair transition in the context of leaving no one behind for this discussion. So this is just so that everyone is on the same page as to what the discussion is going to be talking about. When we talk about a green transition, we mean efforts in a shift towards environmentally sustainable and ecologically responsible models that reduce the negative impact that our human activity has on the environment. And when we talk about it, we usually refer to elements such as climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, or resource depletion. Some of the key sectors that we usually refer to regarding the green transition include energy, transport, and agriculture, which are all sectors, incidentally, where our panelists have experience. Then when we talk about a fair transition, is ensuring that this green transition that we're talking about is equitable for all individuals, for women, men, marginalized communities in different contexts, because not everyone is equally affected by the adverse effects of climate change or faces the same costs in dealing with a green transition. And so these are concepts that, while they're not necessarily opposed in theory, in practice, sometimes require some trade-offs in the context of the work that we do in the different regions of work, where we work. So our panelists will share their viewpoints and some of the tactics that they use in the Western Balkans, in the Eastern Partnership, and also in Portuguese-speaking African countries on how they are introducing or contemplating different initiatives that help them reconcile green and equity objectives to ensure that no one is left behind in the green transition. If you want to hear more about how RECONOMY has also conceptualized this matter, there is information you can get from an inception phase that was published a few months ago. It's hyperlinked here on the presentation, and I will try to share the link on the chat as well as we proceed. So without further ado, we're going to almost get into the heart of the topic, just a bit of housekeeping. Share your questions or comments if you have them during the discussion here on the chat box. Or if you want to speak when we get to the Q&A section, just raise your hand and you will be given the floor. Obviously, it's not just questions, it's also your experiences we're interested about. The format of the webinar will be 5 questions to our panelists and then Q&A for everyone to chime in. Our distinguished panelists consist of Mayra Pereira, who wears many hats. She is the founder of Gaia Consulting. She's based in Maputo in Mozambique. Gaia Consulting is a boutique consulting firm focused on climate and the gender nexus in Mozambique. They're also based in Angola, and she's the president of several associations, including the Portuguese-speaking Association for Renewable Energy, and the co-founder of Women in Energy. Victor is an energy policy coordinator for the Western Balkans at the Climate Action Network, Europe. He's based in Brussels, and he focuses on energy and climate action to facilitate a transition towards renewables. And Natalia Koszowska is the Gender and Social Inclusion Manager at RECONOMY in Helvetas. So the views that they're going to share today do not necessarily reflect the views of their respective projects or organizations.
Aquí van a record, yeah?
We are recording. Okay, yeah. Another bit of housekeeping, please mute your mics or you shall be muted. All right, so without further ado, let's dive into the first question. And this question goes to Victor and Mayra. So as I think we're all familiar with, there is a perceived tension between achieving environmental and inclusion objectives in our contexts. For example, between poverty reduction and green growth. In your experience, how can both types of objectives be reconciled? Victor, would you care to start?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for this kind invitation, and congratulations on the project that you're developing and the opportunity to discuss very, very interesting questions. 2 nights ago, I attended Bernie Sanders' book tour presentation here in Brussels, and one of the, many things he said is that we can talk all the time about the answers, but it is important that we actually answer the correct questions. So this is one of those correct questions that need to be answered. And please do take into account that I speak from the context of the Western Balkans and the EU and Europe as as a whole, which most of the countries are actually represented here, and that while what we have been experiencing, especially in the last 4 or 5 decades, is that actually the need towards sustainability and efficiency has been growing up, because we live in a final world of resources, and we have seen that we have been utilizing all of those resources not to the most efficient way. So that was the first step actually into going into this green transition. And thank you for explaining a part of what green transition means, because many, and especially those who will greenwash, will say, okay, we'll just paint this building green, and that it is. But actually it means a complex a stream of work and results in order to actually achieve equitability and sustainable development of people, societies, and the environment. So in this sense, the renewable, first we go towards that sustainability, and key to that sustainability is efficiency and utilizing whatever we have in the efficient way, starting from how we behave, how we utilize the raw materials and the fossil fuels that we have extracted, and to actually how we behave as individuals into saving, how much we shower, how much we use open and close the fridge, etc. Then we need to understand that in this finite world of fossil fuels, we need the move towards more sustainable sources is actually a natural step. But what we have seen that in the last 150 years, we have been the ones who have been actually contributing to the change for the first time as it is happening due to human activity, meaning that all of the burning of the fossil fuels have created such a big greenhouse effect that it is continuing to warm our planet. And scientists for more than 50 years have been calling to actually take action in reduction of burning fossil fuels towards renewable energy. Now, some of the countries, especially when we talk about the Balkans, we have a higher reliance on the fossil fuels, predominantly on coal, and even worse on lignite, which is the worst, not the worst, but the least lowest quality of coal. And reliance on it has cost us tremendous. While countries in the region will always argue that their energy prices, and I'm talking before 2021, when the energy crisis hit us, we have been witnessing that these costs were not actually concrete, because while they may in the end be low cost of electricity bills, there has been a high social cost related to the amount of death, amount of how much is paid in healthcare, how much do we actually subsidize the fossil fuel industry in order to keep it alive instead of moving to the renewables. And one of the biggest kind of red flags that has been pointed out in the Western Balkans has been the abundance of financial support, actually the loan guarantee for Kosovo power plant project by the World Bank in 2018, saying that investing in fossil fuels is not anymore the most viable economic way. So the growth or the sustainability to which we actually foresee in the context that we live today is actually enrooted in efficiency, and it is enrooted renewable economy. And when I say renewable, let me be very, very clear. We are talking about the renewable energy sources, which actually have the sustainability. Today, we have many interpretation of what it is. People actually see even gas or nuclear power plant or nuclear energy as green, which actually are not. One is still a fossil fuel, and the second one, well, after Fukushima in 2011, I don't think that we need any more discussion about the threat of use of nuclear power. So I will stop here and leave some time for also my co-speaker. Just Clara, you're muted.
Of course I am. It's only been, what, 3 years since that we're doing this. So Mayra, from your perspective, how are you managing this tension between these types of objectives in your work?
Yeah. And thank you, Victor. I think this really shows how in different positions we are, and we really need to start to dissect the concept of green transition to the different areas or geographies that we are. I don't know if you can see the picture behind me, or that is my background, but basically this is our reality, right? This was taken approximately 10 years ago, and I don't know if the number of trees that you can see there behind are still there. If you probably can't see the detail, but that is two women carrying firewood in their hands, because that's the only type of fuel that they have access to. Mozambique in 2022, we only had an electrification rate of 44%, and I think everyone here is aware of the 2030 goal, and this is the reality in many of the Lusophone countries. I want to specifically talk about Mozambique because Mozambique has one of the largest generation hydroelectric power generation that not only feeds power to Mozambique, but to the Southern African development community. So this is called Hidroelétrica de Caorabassa. So our grid is mainly from hydro. And if you have been following the recent years, let's say over the past 10 years, we've discovered large reserves of coal and gas. And this has been the question, right? Every discussion that we have about how is Mozambique thinking of the future, we are still more than 60% in the falling behind on the electrification rate. We have hydro, we have coal, we have gas, we have solar, and we have wind. So in terms of our energy needs, we should be the country reaching the 100% faster than anyone else. But this is 2023, and this is pretty much the view that you can see for the large majority of people. So again, how do you reconcile? I wear definitely a renewables hat. I think the renewables hat has been quite a recent hat for this part of the world. But of course, whenever we look at how we're gonna deal with our internal resources, we have to look at fossil fuels, and we have to further understand what the transition means for us, because we come from a very clean background, right? Mainly hydro. We are definitely putting a lot of efforts into solar and wind, but from a climate perspective, and I will leave this a little bit for discussion with everyone that is here today. But should Mozambique leave the coal and the gas behind and move completely to renewables? Or should we really use all the resources that we have to meet the energy demands and ensure that the large majority of the population can really be out of poverty? So Clara, I'm going to stop here because I think we have quite an interesting conversation coming.
Thank you. And
thank you.
Very, very important questions. But yeah, not as every time we talk about this topic, it's never black or white, right? There's like a whole nuance in between. So thank you both. I think like the takeaway from this question is that it's work in progress, and that people will start at different places, and there will be a series of considerations that need to be taken into account in terms of access to energy and where that energy comes from before being able to answer this question. We're going to move on to our second question, that is for Natalia, who is a GESI manager at RECONOMY. So Natalia, RECONOMY is working across multiple regions, and it's also striving to achieve gender and social inclusion and environment and climate change objectives. Could you share some lessons about how you are managing this challenge of reconciling both?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, and thank you everyone for attending today. Eager to learn more about our experience. So yeah, indeed, green and gender dynamics don't always align, and the uniqueness of the RECONOMY program is actually that it's pioneering the mainstreaming of both its main pillars of work: environment and climate change consideration, and gender and social inclusion objectives across its portfolio. And for economies, market system development program in women's economic empowerment is an imperative, and overall any program intervention can be categorized by a gender market framework as following. As gender informed, like built-in dialogue and fostering a participatory consultation process involving women into the decision making. Gender responsive. In this category, we implement, for instance, trainings and upskilling programs targeting women specifically. And gender transformative. Here, our focus is on advocacy for sectoral reform, inclusive policy changes, or shifts in social norms. In countries where economy operates in Western Balkan and the Eastern Partnership, women often bear additional burden of unpaid care work, being perceived as both caregivers, primary caregivers, and secondary earners. And in this situation, this significantly contributes to the care economy, which demands our attention to ensure that women can participate meaningfully while addressing the power imbalance in both formal and informal settings. And as for the formal sector of economy, flexible working hours can offer benefits. Also, green jobs are frequently part of the informal economy in the developing countries where we work. So these informal jobs often come with lower wages and unsafe working conditions. Thus, formalization can provide this important job security and better flexibility, especially for women. And on average, women bear like 3 times more domestic chores, responsibilities, and unpaid care work, childcare. So yeah, this has to be taken into account when designing the training programs for targeting specifically women. As an example, RECONOMY successfully advocated for the formalization of non-formal waste collectors from the Roma community in North Macedonia, and particularly in the waste management sector, applying the circular economy approach together with ready recycling. And the government prioritized excluded groups, introducing these new job opportunities and upskilling and reskilling services to formalize their employment. And to create a more inclusive and lasting impact, we jointly build awareness among the implementing partners and market actors on environment and climate change and gender and social inclusion altogether, simultaneously, particularly in relation to the sectors of economy that are predominantly traditionally dominated by men. And for instance, in the sectors of energy efficiency and construction, which is in South Caucasus countries, have a great deal of potential for renewable energy and for improving energy efficiency. So there will be many new jobs created and great demand for new trained skilled workers. So as an example, RECONOMY facilitated training for youth and women to acquire this necessary knowledge and skills for the installation of this modern energy efficient windows and doors. Yeah, actually, I can go on a lot talking about the RECONOMY, so please, Clara, interrupt with your questions.
No, I don't want to interrupt. I am mindful of time. It's very interesting, but I did want to ask you specifically about how you're working also in fragile and conflict-affected states. We saw in the video that you work in countries like Ukraine. How are you still managing to keep these types of objectives in those contexts?
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, given the complexity of the economy work and geography that we cover, on top to gender and social inclusion and the environment and climate change lens, we have to be mindful of the conflict sensitivity. And we are attentive to the pressing issue of domestic violence, for instance, affecting approximately every third women globally, and this is the same reality for the countries we're working in, especially for Ukraine nowadays. And as a consequence of any conflict of war, women are disproportionately affected, and the risk of gender-based violence and domestic violence increases. Thus, it's important to take into account when designing interventions targeted female internally displaced people and refugees. As for the later, RECONOMY piloted a successful partnership with Swedish Betrut Academy in Moldova, helping female refugees from Ukraine to obtain a new specialty in IT, gaining this so needed economic independence, and also breaking the stereotypes that this is purely for industry purely for men. So yeah, RECONOMY also takes into account all the needs and priorities of the recovery plan for Ukraine, as there is plenty of potential in terms of the energy efficiency and construction in particular.
Thank you very much. It definitely adds a layer of complexity. So thank you for sharing. We now jump, and I'm sorry to be going fast, but I am very mindful of time. So we're just going to jump to our third question that I'm going to address to Mayra and Natalia. My question is whether you think that gender and social inclusion considerations are generally sufficiently covered when planning for environmental and energy efficiency interventions. And in your experience, what are the advantages of actually taking these considerations into account? And how can projects go about it? What tactics can they use? So Mayra, maybe if we start with you.
Yeah. Thank you, Clara. I would say that generally, I think gender and social inclusion, particularly for this part of the world, has not sufficiently been considered. When we look at regulations, for example, if you look first at the land regulation, we identify some positions where women are considered, but then in a practical form, women have little knowledge of administrative or legal support that they can attain to. They usually don't own the land. Land is owned by the men that are already in their family, and then when they get married, it's generally passed on to the husband. Here we have a patriarchal and a matriarchal system, and we have seen that even in the matriarchal system, they are not sufficiently being considered. When we look at the environmental legislation, even for new energy projects, this is still a gap. There is we have to look at social and environmental components, but the gender is not explicitly stated. So in general, I think we need to reinforce the way that the gender lens is taught. At this point in time, I have been working with a number of financiers from Europe, and I understand that the legislation has changed recently. There are now parameters that need to be put into new projects that will ensure that from design phase all the way to implementation phase, gender needs to be considered. And for Mozambique specifically, for me, one of the big points that I've been advocating is we are still 51.26% of the population. Just in terms of economy, if you completely not consider 51.26%, it's a huge loss. But again, the other day I was in a presentation where they presented the status of SDG 5 across the globe, and we are still 300 years away of meeting the targets that were put there. Now imagine for a country in Africa and I usually say this in the large majority of meetings that I go, that speaks Portuguese, because I still do believe that a lot of the decisions that are made worldwide generally take more time to trickle to Lusophone and Francophone countries, because, or I think even Spanish countries, but the Francophone and the Lusophone are generally the ones that take some time for these interventions to come through. So in terms of tactics that we are currently using, as Clara said, I'm very much involved since the inception of my company, which is in 2019, trying to change the discourse. So we've been working in the development of new units within government to support, for example, the coordination and planning of the electrification under a program called Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa. And one of the priorities of this new unit is how do we really integrate gender in this unit that will trickle down potentially to public policies. The second thing that we've been doing is to liaise with the private sector. So we have been working alongside AMER, which is a renewable energy association of Mozambique, jointly with Canopy Lab, with Clara specifically, and we wrote a document that I really, really love the name, because, and I think, Clara, you were the responsible person for that name, which is Renewable Energy for All, being intentional about inclusion in Mozambique. Because we really looked at how the private sector can start to be involved with the spectrum. One is affordability. If you look at the people who are there in the picture, can they really afford? And how do we really bring them into the conversation? Of course, public policy is important, but there are so many things that we need to do because they never had access to electricity. So awareness campaigns, financial literacy, and I think at the end of the work that we've done, what we found out is there's no data. And the fact that there is no data is the starting point to understand that decisions can only be made if data is available. So the first step that we need to do is definitely to start collecting data. And we have been very fortunate to work alongside government to ensure that the gender lens is included, is going to be included. And through associations like the other association, which is the Mozambique Women of Energy, we have been women from different sides and pushing them to be advocates, because this is still a very long way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayra. Thank you for those insights and some of the strategies around building coalitions and empowering civil society to also make the case for more gender considerations in policymaking. Natalia, could you add some of the tactics or your opinion around the importance of including gender in ECC?
Yeah, sure. And when preparing, I decided to give a broader perspective to this discussion and give some practical tips, given that we have a very diverse audience today. So yes, in any program intervention, it's essential to start with a proper analysis. In our case, it was a market system analysis applying gender and social inclusion lenses, as well as green environmental perspective, specifically per country and per sector of economy we were dealing with. And this analysis serves as a foundation for identifying the entry points and constraints that can face different groups and population. It also helps to crystallize partnerships and identify alliances to effectively perform this policy dialogue. For instance, on the ground, we have an example of partnering with the Roma community associations or female entrepreneurs. And next step would be definitely investments in the creating, designing of this inclusive and gender-sensitive program interventions, where we have to address specific needs and concerns of women and disadvantaged groups. And it's essential to also consider intersectionality and just transition, because gender impacts of transitions vary drastically, and they can be influenced by so many factors such as age, ethnicity, disability, displacement status. And if we fail to consider this intersectionality dynamics, we may end up with inefficient program implementation. Another crucial aspect would be profound monitoring, of course, and we have to ensure that the data collection includes meaningful disaggregation by various factors such as age, sex, ethnicity, other aspects, whether it's a rural or urban community. And this, of course, is guided by the principle mentioned before, the principle of leaving no one behind. We track quantitative indicators such as the number of women with green and decent jobs, but also qualitative indicators such as improved green skills relevant to the market, or raise awareness about the energy efficiency among women and youth and the most disadvantaged groups. And yeah, it's important to remember that these tools, this approach, it requires resources. It definitely starts with the capacity building of your team, or hiring a dedicated person such as gender and social inclusion manager, or environment and climate change manager, monitoring and results-based manager. And yes, this needs money, so it's better to budget it from the start, on the onset of the program. And otherwise, by not focusing on gender and social inclusion, we may risk leaving disadvantaged individuals behind, especially those that lack the voice in the decision-making process, and we don't want to do that. To illustrate in one particular...
Sorry, Natalia, just because we only have 20 minutes left, and I'm seeing that there's already some discussion happening in the chat. I'm sorry to interrupt. We're just gonna move to question number 4. And I hope you can elaborate on the illustration during the Q&A, because you shared really practical tips that I think are really extremely useful for all of us, mainly for us who work in market systems development programs. So very keen to hear more about that. But now a question for Mayra and Victor that I'm gonna ask as much as possible that you keep as brief as you can. It's a relatively straightforward question on paper. What role can governments play in promoting a green and just transition? Mayra, do you want to give your top 3 tips?
Yes, and now we're facing each other. I think that, well, this needs to be driven by government. I'm an environmentalist by training, and I think if we look 15 years ago, and potentially even before the pandemic, the climate space was mainly considered an environmental conversation. We would never involve anyone else in this conversation. This was us discussing how we would save the world and trying to dissect many of the concepts that are now part of everyone's lives. And I think the role of governments, and I've seen this in Mozambique, is the units that are looking into climate change, for example, they're no longer, or they are still sitting within the Ministry of Environment, but they are now sitting under the Ministry of Economy and Finance, because the way that the country is going to work, the budgets that need to be allocated to tackle some of these issues need to come from a line. So I think it's very important that they consider this a top priority. What I find in Mozambique is that many of the male-dominated sectors, so for example, if you look at construction, if you look at transport, the green transition is still a question. How do we transition some of these sectors into green, right? Specifically because the amount of resources that you need to transform are huge for the type of ways that we're looking that are present for us now. And I go back to my initial point, which is we Africans down south, we need to start looking for specific solutions that are very adequate to the context that we live in. Okay. And again, what role can governments play in promoting a green and just? And on that just, I would specifically say we need to start including gender, because when we look at construction and transport, and I think, Natalia, you mentioned a really important topic, which is waste management and circular economy, and even the renewable energy component, they still need to understand how women are going to be involved, how vulnerable groups are going to be involved. We can really train groups, but we also, from the Mozambique context, we also need to prepare the company, the private sector, to ensure that they understand that 51.26% will deliver a number of benefits apart from just being good for business. So I would say governments are the ones that should dictate the rules to ensure that this green and just energy transition can start and be integrated and decentralized for countries. Thank you.
Mayra. Victor, what can you add?
Thank you. Well, I can a bit add, I can build, and I can maybe provide something in addition. When we are talking about this transition, and I really need to underline that we have to put the word just in it, that this transition actually has the people at the center of it and environment, because these are actually the stakeholders who are being impacted. I believe that the governments, while they do need to have a central role, they need, first of all, to ensure inclusion of all of the affected parties in order to actually achieve what can be achieved, in the sense of hearing all angles, filling up all the needed holes in order to ensure that actually the justice is being served in all of this transition. Now, the other thing is, I mean, we are way behind planning. I wanted to talk about plans, but we should be talking about implementation. But without proper plans, we really cannot move forward. That is why very much coherent, credible, and transparent plans need to actually be built in order to ensure that all of the stakeholders involved understand the impacts. And here I'm talking even beyond, I'm talking about the businesses, etc. That is now, for instance, in the Western Balkans, well, in the most of the countries who are part of the Energy Community Treaty, so I'm speaking about the Western Balkans, Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, are now developing their national energy and climate plans. And these plans should deliver on achieving the 2030 energy and climate target with a long vision of decarbonization. So right now, it is very much important that the policies and measures within these plans actually reflect all of the needs. So we are talking about economy-wide plans. We are not talking about one sector or one part of the economy. That is why this planning needs to be very much thorough and have specific goals and specific targets and specific finances in order actually how to achieve it. Without that, we actually cannot move to the third phase, which is the implementation. And what maybe we have seen from the technology of building designing the vaccine for COVID, etc., how researchers have worked on parallel phases of designing the final vaccine, because it would have taken years. That is how we actually need to do now. We need to implement as much as possible to reap the low-hanging fruits in order to leave space for the specific short to mid-term policies and measures and plans to actually be implemented. And maybe this is one of the things that we need to address, is also how to finance this, because the countries which are poor, and most of these countries that we are actually talking about today, do not have the capability of ensuring not only the justice, but actually the transition at all. And that is why we need a very huge cohesion between the donors and the programs which actually operate in these countries in order to deliver results. We see them, and we are talking about IFIs, we are talking about the EU, who have amazing programs in all of these countries, but we need them to actually bring them together, and this is where the national governments should lead example with their plans and showcase where these funds need to be addressed and and then we can work on with them in how to raise them. And of course, we need to be very much working with the private sector, because we need the public and private partnership in this. We need to enable to see what other financial instruments we have in order to make it work, whether it is through the financial markets, etc., which I'm not going to get into the discussion now. But these are kind of the central roles where the government needs to actually play together with all of us, because without a proper supervision and accountability of the actions of the government, we definitely can be very easily derailed, as we have been witnessing for many past decades.
Thank you very much. Very, very important insights around the role that governments can take in providing coordination services, but not only. And it adds also to what Mayra was explaining around the role that they can play in leveling the playing field to make sure that the private sector can operate in fair conditions. I'm going to take the executive decision, given time, to not ask you the last question and just leave that in the back burner, because I do want to give people some room to also share. I saw that Noor Akhter had a question to all of you, the three panelists, around asking, can you please tell us about leverage contribution of private sector? I think, Natalia, Noor asked this question when you were talking about how to engage the private sector in solutions for the green transition. So I think very specifically, they want to know how much you're managing to leverage from private sector partners in this process. Could you share something around that? I'm asking you, Natalia, in case it wasn't clear, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, it wasn't clear. Yeah, sure. Thanks. I would probably start with a pessimistic note first, because I would observe is that probably given to the complexity of the global instability, economical and political instability, less attention is now given to environmental and social issues. And we have to keep those seems kind of trendy, not like nice to have, but acknowledge that gender and social inclusion and environmental and climate change are essential in our work, and it requires building a dialogue with the private sector, showing them the incentives, showing them how they would benefit by having a diverse team, by investing in new job creation from the start that are decent and provide proper wages and work safety, how in the long run it will benefit them. And also I observe positive trend in new generation, particular of young people that pay attention to when they are considering which company to a job, they go through the values of this company, what it stands for, what processes it has in production, and also they make conscious choice themselves, like what mentioned in the beginning, like how we on the daily basis practice green choices and inclusion. So yeah, I think this starts from building the dialogue with the private sector and showing them that they have a role to play and also how it benefits them. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. And I hope, Noor, that answered your question. I'm just reading through some of the comments that people shared. All right, Narcissus, thank you. As I put in there, if anyone wants to share their insights as well with everyone else live, it makes reading and speaking a bit less difficult for me. But I'm seeing here, right, Cristiano has an example to share from rural Mozambique, which is interesting. And Edlira, very nice to see you, shares her views around the role that governments can play in early stages to promote the green transition. I don't know if anyone has a question or wants to share something live. If not, I'm going to ask our three panelists the last question that we had prepared for this webinar. I'm giving people 5 seconds to raise their hands or ask a question on this chat. And if not, all right. The last question I had for the three panelists concerns maybe the closing statement. So what advice do you have for donors and implementers when it comes to prioritizing inclusion and the environment, very practically? So Natalia, maybe we can start with you, and then Mayra, and finally Victor for closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you. I will probably continue the thought that I started with the private sector, because the recommendations would probably be the same, and to keep in mind that this is essential. Gender and social inclusion and environmental and climate change is essential in our program interventions. And we have to have this mutual understanding of the value it has at the headquarter level and on the ground level of implementers and practitioners that are doing the actual work. Like even, for instance, the recent Nobel Prize in economics given to Claudia Goldin, it's so groundbreaking. She devoted her life to investigating these disparities in the labor market and the pay gender gap, which is like 30% in Eastern, for instance. And this brings this issue of like women's rights from like political agenda to a present economic challenge, which has to be addressed by international community and donors. And yes, we have to encourage women's participation in highly productive sectors. And in today's tech-driven era, there is no advantage of physical strength only. So it opens doors to women and young people with disabilities, including to diverse professions. But it's important to keep in mind the fundamental questions, like why are women underrepresented in a specific sector of economy? What are the obstacles on their way to the progress? Whether it's the social norms, that stereotypes that limit their access to knowledge and education. So yes, these are the burning questions to keep in mind and never forget. Thank you.
Very much. Mayra, what do you think? What advice do you have shortly for implementers and donors on the topic of this?
As I was thinking of what Natalia was saying and how I could add, I just read Alexander's comment, which is any form of social change process needs to be driven by national or local actors working in partnership and with understanding politics of change. And this is, you just summarized what I was thinking. I am engaged at the moment on the creation of a toolbox for Southern Africa for a German donor. So now Germany, for example, they have this foreign policy for development, and all projects, they need to comply with some form of gender. So they have to be a GG1 or a GG2. And what we're trying to do at the moment, I'm working specifically on Mozambique, but we try to understand how the project preparation works, how the project implementation works, and then understand the local institutions that they are working with, and then provide a set of options that they can choose from, that initially they don't have to attain to, I think, what is expected of the highest, but it's a movement to ensure that we are able to achieve the minimum requirements, and as time goes, they will increase. social change is not something that you do in a year, 2 year, 5 years. This is, countries that have history, and this needs to be taken into account, and to see how we can actually work within the rules and structures to ensure that you really deliver benefits for the people. So I will leave. I think I will make my words Alexandra's words. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Victor?
And well, one of the last points, actually, we need to respect and understand the implications of those projects on the environment, because we need a proper environmental impact assessment of these projects. And especially when we talk about our regions, we have seen that although we have on paper a very solid legislation on the environmental impact assessment of the projects, we do not actually comply that much. So there are many of international organizations who actually operate and who will accept whatever result of the environmental impact assessment without their accountability of their assessment, if that is actually a properly done environmental assessment. That is why we definitely need more accountability from the donors, but also earmarking specific amount of funding which they actually send to these countries towards projects which allow energy transition, inclusion, social and climate justice. So this would be my recommendation for the donors and implementers.
Very good way to finish this webinar. Thank you to the three of you. It was a really great discussion, and I really appreciate you taking your time. Thank you to RECONOMY for creating the space for this webinar to take place. Thank you all for joining us on a busy Thursday. It really was great to have you all on board and share your insights. And yeah, we hope that this is just the beginning of a fruitful discussion. So thank you. Have a nice rest of the day. And yeah, we'll cross paths again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.